ahead and get started tonight. Most of you know the pastor. I can't remember where the pastor is. I think he went to Boston today, and he's there for a little while, and then he's headed to, where's he headed to? New Hampshire? Is that it? So, I don't know. I'm not keeping up with him, obviously. But anyways, that's where he is at, and some of you mentioned about junior camp. We just got back today, got back at noon. Sabrina felt like she had enough church up there that she didn't have to come tonight, but apparently her parents are mean and drug her to church anyway, so which I appreciate that. I was drugged as a kid as well, so but nonetheless, we're here. Glad you're here. We're going to have church tonight, so let's open up in a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Dear Heavenly Father, I do thank you for this night. I thank you for the opportunity we have to come and worship you, and I just pray that you'll be with us tonight. Be with the pastor and Miss Misty as they're away. Just give them safety of travel, and I just pray that their trip will be productive. And be with us tonight as we look at your word. And I just pray we can take some things and apply them to our life. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. If you're willing and able, won't you stand with me? Like a hymn, you can turn to page 328. First and last at Calvary. On the first. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free, pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burden so fell liberty at Calvary on the last. Oh, the love that your salvation's plan. Oh, the grace that brought it down to man. Oh, the mighty love that God did spend at Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burden so found liberty at Calvary. Good, singing, you may be seated. If you have your prayer sheet, if you would get that out, we'll go over it. Prayer page and announcement page, we'll go over that. Got a few things to make mention of. So our ministry of the week this week is our Sunday school and adult Bible study. Of course, we always encourage that. That's at 9:30 on Sunday morning. And so be part of that if you can. And then we see our government leader of the week is the Mesa Mayor, John. Do be in prayer for him and pray that he makes wise decisions and everything that he does. And then we got our missionary of the week is Jimmy and Sarah. They are in Japan. I believe we had the picture for them, so do continue to be in prayer for them. And then our church planner of the week, Arthur Grimes, Daryl Michelle. They have went self-supporting, which is awesome, but we are going to continue to support them through the end of the year. What we give to them is going to go to their building fund, and so you know it's kind of, that can be a little tricky sometimes because you hit the goal of going self-supporting and hey, it's great now, and then you realize, oh wait, we're self-supporting, you know, so we're here all alone. All those people that was helping us are now. So it can, you know, be a transition, but it obviously is a great thing that they're doing that. But like I said, we're going to continue to support them and help them with their building fund. Our church pastor of the week in Arizona is the Gibson family, John and Carrie. The preacher asked if there was anything, any prayer request that could be made mention of And he just said more salvations. And so I feel like that's a pretty good prayer request for any church. And so that's what they're asking for, is more salvations. And then I believe we have the prayers for adoption as well. And that would be Evan. Was born in 2008. And of course, we got the website up there and even at the bottom of the prayer list. If you want to know more information about that and what goes on there, you can pray for that. So just flipping over, the prayer requests have quite a few health needs to make mention of. Of course, Brother Jeff, good ones on there, and I believe you're having a procedure June the 10th. Is that right? That's this Friday. Is that June the 10th already? I guess it is, ain't it? Yeah. Boy, time's just flying by when you're having fun, ain't it? So do be in prayer for Brother Jeff. And then Miss Roberta Thomas, she is having trouble with her hip, and be in prayer for her. Miss Margot is concerned about her heart, so be in prayer for her. And Brother David Bergeron, I believe is how you say it, that is Connie Little's brother-in-law. He has cancer. He's not doing well. He's struggling to breathe. So be in prayer for him. And then we got Kevin Boner. Of course, this is Greg and Jeff's brothers. He did get a test result back today and basically said not today. He did get it back, and they said, we don't know what we're going to do with you. No, that's not what. The tumor's not growing, if I understood Greg right, and they possibly doing radiation and chemo again, if I heard you right. And so kind of in that crossroads where maybe they're not 100% sure what to do or which way to go, but but the good news is that the tumor isn't growing, and they're going to try to do that and see if that helps. And then Jake Pinkerton, that is Jerry and Carol's Pinkerton's grandson. They're former missionaries. He's 4 years old and having seizures, and pray for him. And then Miss Sandy, that comes to church. She rides the van on Sunday morning. She's not on a prayer list, but she's got a letter from her cardiologist. He wants to do a test on her heart. She's kind of a little nervous about it. I guess anytime you get a phone call from your doctor like, hey, we want to do a scan on your heart, I guess that can be a little nerve-wracking. You know, maybe it's nothing, maybe it's more, but anyway, be in prayer for her. And then Duke Hicks was up there as well. I just talked to Brother Paul, Miss Tracy about that as their brother-in-law, and they thought he had a stroke and went a couple weeks and pretty bad, couldn't really move his left side, and finally went to the hospital. And if I understood Brother Paul right, he has a tumor. They found a tumor in his brain that's pushing down on something that gives the effects of a stroke, but he hasn't had a stroke. Is that right, Miss Tracy? Is that close enough? And they're planning on doing surgery Saturday on him, and so be in prayer for that as well. Is there anything else as far as health? Once again, I know I ran through quite a few pretty quick. It seems like a lot of sickness or physical ailments going on at the moment, but is there anything else that wasn't mentioned or need to be updated at this time as far as health needs concerned? Nothing else, that'll work. So do be in prayer for that. And then we do have salvation and spiritual down there as well. Be in prayer for these two families. And once again, if you want to put anything on the prayer list, there's 3 ways you can do it there. Call the church, email us, or you fill out a prayer request card located in the foyer, because we've talked about this before. If you try to tell us when you're leaving or coming in, I know not so much myself, but the pastor is getting a little bit older, and he can't remember quite as well, and so he forgets. And so I have to admit, I'm just as guilty. So if you tell us, I know we try our best to remember things, but best if you do it these 3 ways, and we'll get on there. And speaking of salvation, we did have a good junior camp, and I think at least one said she was saved. It's not from our church, from another church. She talked to Miss Ashley and said she prayed and trusted in Christ. But it was a good spirit, good atmosphere, and so pray for even those that maybe didn't make a salvation decision, that what was taught and preached will stick with them, and they'll be a witness for Christ. Well, at this moment, I'm going to ask Brother Chris Abernathy if he would stand and just remember many of these needs, and if you would just go to the Lord in prayer for us tonight. I do just want to mention on the back of the prayer sheet, I'll mention some announcements in a minute, but at the bottom, we have a prayer list. Of course, if you were here Sunday morning, I believe the preacher showed a video. Of course, we're partnered with the Allen's family and Uganda and things that go on there, and they're highlighting the human trafficking problem and helping there. And there you can see that countdown to Freedom Day, 29 days of prayer, and you have something that's specific to pray for each day. You know, it's one thing just to pray, Lord, just be with a human trafficking problem in Uganda, you know, and right. But when you got something specific to pray for, I believe that means a little more. And so you take this sheet with you, and you got June 9th through 15th, and what you can pray for specifically about each situation there. And so you can do that. And then as far as announcements are concerned and applies to our church, of course, Youth Aflame, that's June the 20th and 23rd. That is, we've been pushing that. 5 of our teenagers, our older teens, we're going to take them Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and there's a youth conference, Youth Aflame, that they put on there. So be praying for the teenagers, be praying for safety of travel for that. And then the Special Hope Center offering, that is July the 3rd, and Vacation Bible School, that's July 11th through 15th. Some of y'all have already signed up in the foyer. If you could help out with that, be praying for that, be helping out. We're going to meet Sunday morning after church Sunday morning. We're meeting. I've been here, how long have I been here? 15 years. And I don't know if we've ever had a meeting on Sunday morning. So you can say, we've never done it like that, Brother Billy. I know, I'm being wild and changing it up. Instead of having it Sunday night, we're going to have it Sunday morning. So if you signed up or want to be a part of that, you can sign up out there and then meet with us Sunday morning after church. And then at the end of July is our teen camp. We're going to Youth Aflame, 5 teenagers, but then the last week in July, that's open up for all of our teenagers. We're going right back to the camp we were just at with juniors, Tonto Realm Christian Camp. That's right outside of Payson. And so we'll be taking all of our teens up there. And I may mention this again on Sunday, but obviously Youth Aflame has cost a lot more. It's going to cost a lot more. It's not something we've done. It's not even something we're going to do every year, maybe every other year. And so it's obviously taking a lot more money with junior camp, teen camp, and then going there. And y'all have done great in helping. Matter of fact, I'll tell you, I think, I don't have it right in front of me, but Miss Michelle gave me the total so far that has been turned in, and it's over $4,000 that has been given toward the youth, specifically toward the youth. And that was through our soup and sandwich night. We've had people give through offering. We've had quite a few people put it on Facebook, put it online. If you can give, some people have given online. And the teenagers have raised money, and thank you for doing that. We obviously couldn't do it if we didn't have help. And so we'll appreciate you helping out. And then the preacher let me know that, let's try to cut back some spending this summer and next couple of months. And he said there's only so many people on staff that he can let go. And he said he's not going to clean the church every week. So I told Ms. Vicky today she's got job security. And so that really only leaves one person. And so I'm telling you that. Thank you for helping raise the money. That way I can keep a job at least for another month or two. And all this here is do be praying for everything that's going on. Summer gets busy. We go through camps and Vacation Bible School and all that. And so if you remember, if you be a part, and then be praying that God speak your hearts. Or if you're willing and able, won't you stand with me one more time? If you like a hymnal, you turn to page 634. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wistful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. may be seated tonight. Thank you, Brother Dylan and Brother Jake. I've been practicing with them on Wednesday nights that they'll get a little better, and I think we about got them there. I just need now to help Miss Jody and Miss Misty and Brother Ken, and boy, our music will be on point then, Miss Jody, right? If you got your Bibles, open to 1 Samuel chapter 9. Where we're going to be at. Of course, we're going through Old Testament characters on Wednesday night, and we're going to talk about Saul, a big fool of a man. This is what we're going to look at. So 1 Samuel chapter 9, we're going to look at verse 2, and then we're going to jump over to chapter 10 and verse 9, and chapter 11, verse 15. We're just going to hit three quick verses, and we're going to highlight some things in his life. Once again, you could break it down to one specific thing, but we're just going to try to just brush over and look at some things and how we can apply it to our life. But 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 2, the Bible says, "And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man and a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any other people." And then we're going to flip over to chapter 10 and verse 9. So we can see that from the get-go, he was a good man. He was a tall man, head and shoulders above anybody else. And so you could see him coming. And so 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 9, "And it was so that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass that day." And then chapter 11 and verse 15, the Bible says, "And all the people went to Gilgal, and there made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly." So we just kind of look a couple things right there just as a way of introduction. Of course, from his beginning to who he was, God changing his heart, to him actually becoming king. And here's the crazy thing. King Saul, you could probably say, is an enigma, right? He just kind of, there's no really other way to explain it, because he was called of God, he was anointed with holy oil, he was given another heart, he was numbered among the prophets, but I think I can probably say with certainty that he was probably as lost as a pagan. How else will you explain it if you look at his life? Do we really understand and know all that Saul had a potential to become, and the potential? I guess when I was studying, I in my mind I thought Saul could have been David. Right? We know David, of course. That's how we're gonna look at Saul tonight, kind of in relation with David, because most of Saul's life was intertwined with David. Obviously, from the beginning it wasn't, but then it wasn't long after that David comes on the scene. And we can look at the way he had a relationship with David, and we can really find out who Saul was. Matter of fact, you can do that today. If you really want to know somebody, you want to know their character, you want to know their heart, watch their relationship with people. Matter of fact, I can even go a step further. Watch their relationship with somebody who's done them wrong. Right? And you can see, and here's the thing. Did David do anything wrong with Saul? Did he do anything wrong to Saul? No. He didn't. Matter of fact, it's the right opposite. David was, I'll be honest, that's probably why you'll never read Billy was a man after God's own heart, because the chances that David had and didn't take them, and we'll look at that in a minute, and the fact that he recognized Saul as God's anointed, and he wouldn't touch him or hurt him, and he wouldn't even say a bad thing about him, and David definitely took the high road But while we'll look at Saul's life, we'll see that is not what Saul did. He did the right opposite and did what you shouldn't do. And so you can look at their two responses to God and how they treated each other and know, hey, which should I do? But looking at Saul, all one has to do is just look at what David brought to light and how he was treated and vice versa. And we can see what we need to know about Saul. So number one, Saul required David. And like I mentioned, Saul was an impressive man. He was the kind of man who people would take a second look at. Now, I'm not a short fella. I mean, I'm 6 foot. I don't guess that's short, although my nephews kept catching up with me pretty good. But I had a friend one time who was, let me think, around 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", something around there. And anytime we went somewhere, do you know what I felt like? I felt like I was a short guy. You know, anytime, we'd walk in, but sometimes he'd have to duck and go in and like, dude, and everywhere, people would look at him. People would ask him, do you play basketball? He did play basketball. But, he was head and shoulders above most people around him, just like Saul. So Saul, from a physical aspect, if he walked by, people would probably take a second look. I don't think they had basketball in that day. Maybe it was like, I wonder if he's in the army or not. But whatever it was, he was impressive. But when it came to spiritual things, you could probably say he was ignorant, right? He was shallow. You could even make the easy argument that Saul's servant knew the things of God better than Saul did. And you say, well, how can you find out? Well, if you look at 1 Samuel, and I think I got these verses on the screen, but 1 Samuel 3:20, the Bible tells us that everybody knew about Samuel, right? The Bible says, and all Israel from Dan went to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. So, everybody knew who Samuel was. If you was in that land, you'd have to be hiding under a rock not to know who Samuel was. But then we jump over to 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 6, and we see the servant talking to Saul, and this is what he said. And he said unto him, behold now, there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man, and all that he saith cometh surely to pass. So, we see in chapter 3 that we see Samuel, and pretty much everybody knows him. Now we have Saul on the scene and his servant in chapter 9 talking about Samuel, saying, hey, there's a godly man or honorable man, and let's go see him. And then we see that meeting in 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 18 and 19. Then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate and said, tell me, I pray thee, where the seer's house is. And that's just another word for prophet. And Samuel answered Saul and said, I am the seer. So apparently, everybody knew who Samuel was except Saul. You ever been looking for somebody and you walk right up to them and you're having a conversation and this person you're talking to and you don't even realize that's the person you're supposed to be meeting? Well, that's exactly what happened to Saul. He's like, hey, buddy, can you tell me where the prophet is? And Samuel's like, well, you're kind of talking to him. You've met him. I'm him. And so just from that aspect and just from that small story, it could probably be easily stated that when it comes to spiritual matters, spiritual things, that Saul was lacking. And look, I'm not sure whether Saul had a regenerate heart or not. I know starting out in chapter 10, it talked about how God gave him a new heart. And within a context of that, you could make an argument for either way, right? And some said he just gave him a heart to be a king, to be the leader of Israel. And you don't ever really see Saul being or having a regenerate heart, but either way, he never did, or he's a prime example of an apostate, right? And so you could go either way there. But we do know in 1 Samuel 18:12, it clearly tells us that the Lord departed from him, right? So whatever the case may be, he had all the makings to be a great king. He had all the makings of being a godly king, a righteous king. He had all the makings, but he came up short. And you can see that Saul faced three enemies, the Philistines, Amalek, and Goliath. And it can easily be said that he failed at all three of the enemies that he faced. He was unable to deal with his enemies, the enemies of God, and he needed someone who could, and that person happened to be David. And so that's why we would say Saul required David. Saul needed David. Now, would Saul ever came out and said, man, I need a man like David? Probably not. I think he's too prideful to do that. Right? I don't think he'd have ever done that. I mean, just look, and when he was, you can look at the story in 1 Samuel, when he was supposed to wait on Samuel to make the offerings, he got impatient and made it himself, did what the prophets were supposed to do. So you could easily say that he was prideful. You could easily say he would have never asked for help. And so Saul lacked a spiritual life. That became increasingly evident in his relationship with David. Samuel, being a great preacher and prophet he could awaken Saul's soul to God, but he could never bring Saul into a heart relationship with God. That choice had to be up to Saul. Now look, if we're not careful, the same can be said of us. If you ever, maybe here at church or on TV or maybe at a revival or whatever, you heard some great preaching. Good preaching. You're like, man, that was some good preaching. And your heart was stirred. And man, you just, we always use the phrase, you felt like you could charge hell with a water pistol. You feel like, I'm ready, I can do it. And then you get excited for God and your heart is stirred, but you leave the church or you leave the revival meeting or you turn off the preacher, and 2 days later you're just doing the exact same thing you was before. In other words, there wasn't what's to change. Hey, you were stirred up, you were ready, and then 2 days later it's kind of, here we go. Now that's what we just got done with camp. That's what we always tell, of course, the junior and teen campers. It's easy to make decisions there. You're surrounded by people that love you. It's going to pray for you. They can't be on their PlayStation or Xbox while they're there, right? They can't be texting everybody. Can't be watching TV. I know it's just like we're living like in 1820 or something. We just get rid of technology and friends. And they do. They get stirred up and they make decisions and they come back home. And if they're not careful, within a day or two, they're just right back doing the same things. And so you could even say that of Saul. Hey, when Samuel would come around, hey, Saul would listen and almost like he wanted to do the right thing. And then what happened? The next day he was doing something dumb. The next day he was being a fool. And you're like, Saul, what is happening? What is going on? So we can see that Saul required David. He needed David. Number two, we can see that Saul ridiculed David. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 33. Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from this youth. So in 1 Samuel, what is this story? What are we talking about here in 1 Samuel? What is it, Sabrina? There you go. David and Goliath. And that's from somebody who didn't even want to come tonight. So good job, Sabrina. I'm proud of you. If I find a piece of candy at the church, I'll give it to you, if your dad will allow it. 1 Samuel 17. This is the battle, right? Still makes reference today, the battle of David and Goliath. And to be honest, if Saul would have been the king he should have been, David wouldn't have had to step up like he did. I think if Saul would have just done what Saul should have done to begin with, David wouldn't have done what he did, but I'm thankful that David did. Saul and everyone else was afraid of Goliath. And you have to remember, Saul was a big guy. I mean, it wasn't like Saul was 5'2" and he was going up against Goliath. I mean, once again, he's head and shoulders. He's a man. You recognize him when you walk by, but yet he's not fighting Goliath. Y'all go take care of that. I'm going to sit back here on my throne. You know, whatever, but he's not going down there. He's not going to do it. Now, whether Saul realized it or not, he had already met David, but he only met him because he employed him as the court musician. Right? You remember early on, Saul needed David to soothe him when he was troubled. He did not know that David was already to be the next chosen king of Israel. But Saul now has to really pay attention to who David is, right? Before, he may just saw him as a shepherd boy. You remember, it's a servant who kind of gave him the recommendation to Saul, came in, played the harp, he soothed him, you know, and maybe that's how he viewed him. But now, he's having to pay attention because David showed up at the battle. And man, I just see David, right? He walks up to that battle, and Goliath is down there, and he's like, who is this dude? Who is this cat talking about my God? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? And he's looking around like, y'all ain't going to do nothing? You know, it's kind of like, I had that same mindset like when we're at a buffet or there's food or we got food at our house and nobody wants to go first. And I'm standing like, y'all ain't going to eat? You know what I mean? There's a line. Somebody better get going. A little bit different, but kind of the same mindset. You know, hey, y'all ain't going to do nothing. Y'all men of war, y'all soldiers. You remember because his brother got upset? Like, oh, David, go back. Take your little sandwiches, peanut butter jelly sandwiches, and go back and run home to daddy. And David like, what? They're not a cause? What we going to do? We just going to stand here or we going to fight? So now he's before Saul. Right? And Saul has to do something. I mean, Saul could either accept David's boldness or he could reject it. And he could have easily sent David home. I mean, he's the king. Y'all take this guy, lock him up, or do something with him. Put some duct tape across his mouth. You know, but I think deep down, there was probably something in Saul to realize, you know what, David's right. You know, somebody's got to step up. And what does he say about David? I read that in verse 33. He called him, he said David wasn't able to go against the Philistine. Why? Because he was a man of war. And David, you're just a youth. You're just a little fella. Right? That's kind of, of course, David like, bro, just give me my sling and I'm ready to go. Give me a couple of rocks. And it wasn't David being arrogant. It was David trusting God. Remember, that's what he told Saul. Look, I was out there watching them sheep. This bear came up. I killed it with my bare hands. Another time this lion came up. I killed it. He's like, and I'm going to do the same thing to this Philistine. In God's name, I'm going to do the same thing to this Philistine. And so it wasn't arrogant. It wasn't like me. I was like, bless God, I'm going to go fight me a Goliath. Anybody in? Let's do it. You know, I got me a gun. I got me a sling. No, he wasn't. He was just saying, somebody better step up. He is talking about our God, the God that's on our side. And so David had that boldness to step up. And then we can see in 1 Samuel 17:39 that Saul's like, well, I can't go, but I'll send you with something. It said, David girded up his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off. So Saul's like, I can't go. Now, don't you think about this. Don't you think Saul knew beforehand that his armor would not fit David? I mean, I almost, once again, you could say you ridiculed, being a smart aleck, because David is not as big as Saul. David's but a youth. You know, maybe David was 5'5". I don't know. We don't know. We know he's young, maybe 14, 15, right? Saul's a bit, and Saul's like, let's put the armor on him. Well, he knew it wasn't going to fit. You know? Come on, Saul, you know that's not going to fit David. And David's like, I hadn't proved this. Man, I've never worn this. I can't go like this. And he takes it off. Let me tell you something that Saul failed to understand. Your looks don't matter to God. And that's what Saul was going off of when he first saw him. You puny little thing. All right? You ain't gonna beat Goliath. Now, I know people take that to the extreme. And they take it out of context, saying, I can look and dress however I want to because God sees my heart. But what I'm saying is, your physical looks, God's not really concerned with. We live in a world that we're all about vanity, right? And mirrors everywhere and trying to look good. And God just wants your heart, right? He just wants you to surrender and say, hey, I want to be used of God. And Saul failed to remember that. You got to remember that the only reason Saul was king was because of his looks. So he probably thought, well, if I'm king because of the way I look, surely this boy can't help me, right? But we know God sees the heart. But David defeated Goliath, and then we really get a look at who Saul is. The women started singing in 1 Samuel 18:7. And the women answered one another as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Oh, you know Saul didn't like that at all. Matter of fact, the next point is Saul resented David. And you go right into the next verse, in verse 8, and it says, and Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? It's almost like he's asking a rhetorical question. It's like he knows it's coming. You know, it's like, what more can he have? The kingdom? Light bulb. Yeah, Saul, that's what's going to happen. That's what's coming. And then he says, and Saul eyed David from that day forward. Have you ever heard someone say, I got my eye on you? Saul took that to heart. He had his eye on David. And can you just imagine? I think about sports figures in here. It'd be like somebody who was good at football. Maybe they scored some touchdowns, and this new young cat comes along, and they scored more touchdowns, and so everybody's singing the young cat's praise, right? Oh, he's awesome. He's the next best thing. And the other guy's like, wait, what? No. There's going to be some jealousy, and maybe the newer guy gets a bigger contract and more money, or like, what is going on? Well, that was Saul. He was very wroth. But wait, they're singing. Who? What do I hear them singing? David? What's going to be next? The kingdom? Oh, maybe it will be. David, I'm watching you. I got my eye on you. So with Saul, jealousy, rage, resentment, things that can darken your soul. Saul hated David from that moment on. Saul resented David, everything David stood for. He resented David because he was the Lord's anointed and because he had proved himself. He resented David because his godly life showed up Saul's sin. Saul resented David for his knowledge of God. Saul hated the thought that people all over the land were singing David's song and singing David's praises. You could say Saul resented David for the same reasons people today will resent you and reject Christ if you stand with him. It's almost a mindset of, if I had to be miserable, then you should too, right? If I can't have what I want, then you should suffer as well. Look, when you stand for Christ and you do what's right, like David did, everybody's not going to like you. Don't want to burst your bubble. There's going to be people to resent you. There's going to be people that would be happy if you just died. I mean, they go to that extreme. That's what Saul was doing. So Saul resented David. He resented him so much that he even tried to kill his own son Jonathan. In 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 33, And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. Now, I've had my dad get upset with me a couple times. That's hard for y'all to understand because I was like his perfect child out of 4 of us. I've never had him throw a javelin at me, you know. Now, I've had some brothers throw some things at me, you know, like a broom and a baseball and a dumbbell, you know, that you work with. About broke my leg. But my dad has never done that. Saul was so resentful of David, he literally threw a javelin at his own son, Jonathan. Do you see what anger can do? You see how anger and jealousy, how it can drive you to these things? And that's what it did for Saul. But not only that, lastly we can see that Saul rejected David. Saul's life became a mad crusade against David, and it was to kill him. He gathered men around who hated David. He made short work of anyone suspected of siding with David. In other words, Saul was saying, hey, you with David, you against me, and I'm going to kill you, is what it came down to. And you can see that in 1 Samuel chapter 22. I'm not going to read all these verses, but it gives an example of how bad Saul was, how far he had fallen, how much he hated David. The short story of this is that Ahimelech had helped David a little bit, not really want to, but gave him some bread, gave him the sword of Goliath, and they found out about it. One of Saul's little minions told him about it, and so do you know what he did? He ordered the massacre of all of them, and 85 priests were among the victims that were slaughtered that day, all because they gave David a little bit of bread and Goliath's sword. And then you can see 1 Samuel 22:19. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and sucklings and oxen and asses and sheep with the edge of the sword. They wiped out everybody because you sided with David. That anger, that resentment, that rage, right? And so Saul rejected David. The crazy thing is, and I mentioned this at the beginning, is 2 separate occasions David could have killed Saul, and he didn't. My favorite story of David is how he's out, because he's got his own little army now. I mean, he's got people that realize David's the next king and God's on his side, and they're like, I want to be on his side, and they're hiding in the cave, and Saul and his men come and hide in the same cave. You know, David's like, shh, let's back up a little bit. You know, he backed up a little bit, and then he cut, and this is what's crazy about me, and my human, the human side of me is he cuts his garment, right, and you think, man, David, you could have, and what happened? David feels bad about it. He asks for forgiveness. It's like, dude, he's trying to kill you, and you feel bad because you just took your knife and cut a little bit of piece of garment. But once again, you look at Saul, you look at David, you look at the heart, and that's what makes the difference. That's the difference between Saul and David. And David never stopped loving Saul. He realized that he was God's anointed. Even some of David's own people never understood why David did not kill him. And Saul finally even confessed in 1 Samuel 26:21 that he was a fool. He said, then said Saul, I have sinned. Return my son David, for I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thy eyes. This day, behold, I have played a fool and have erred exceedingly. Right? It's almost like Saul finally realized, but Saul, it's too late. Right? You had all these chances to be what you ought to be. Saul got so low that he even sought out a witch for help. The potential that Saul had was great, but he never lived up to it. But what can we learn from this? How can we take this and apply it to our life? I think we can go back to 1 Samuel chapter 12 and verses 14 and 15 of what Samuel had to say to Israel not long after Saul became king, and what he had to say. He said, if you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye and also the king that reigneth over you continue following the Lord your God. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you as it was against your fathers. You either do what's right or you don't. You either follow God and His commandments or you don't. You either receive God's blessings or you receive God's curse. Saul had that at his hand, right, when he was a king. And then probably one of the saddest verses you can read about Saul is 1 Samuel chapter 28 and verse 6. It says, and when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, not by Urim, not by prophets. God was gone. Right, now he's trying, and then again, that's when he tries to seek out a witch. And man, what a sad life for Saul. And once again, from the world standards, man, he looks good. Man, I'm good looking. I'm just not as tall as he is, right? But he had the looks. He was tall. He was king. Had it all. But spiritually speaking, there was nothing there. And then when he tried to go back to God, God was gone. And so we can apply that to our lives and say, who are we going to be like? We're going to be like Saul. We're going to be like David. We're going to have anger and bitterness. And look, there's things that happen in your life. There's probably some things that's happened in your life that I don't even know about, that a lot of people don't even know about. But what do? You see forgiveness. I mean, you look at David and Jonathan in this story, two people that could have been mad. Two people who could have been upset. Jonathan could have said, I don't want to be friends with David. He's trying to take the throne from me. David could have been like, he's trying to kill me. I got every right. But when you continue the story and look, even when David found out that Jonathan was killed and his brothers and Saul was killed, David wept over that. He cried over that. Most people today would have been like, well, they got what was coming to them. Bless God. I'm glad they got to him before I did, because I'd have done the same thing. Okay, either we're going to follow God and do what's right and have compassion even on those who are lost and have compassion even on those who hate us and resent us, or we can be like Saul. Right? And I hope, and our prayer is, man, I want to be more like that. I want to be like Saul. I don't want to have that anger and that bitterness and that resentment. We have all the things at our fingertips, at our hands. We have a choice to make as individuals and as a church. Hey, we're either going to do what's right, we're going to do what God has for us, or we're going to do what's selfish, and we're going to do what the world has for us. And the choice is up to you. Let's stand with our heads bowed and eyes closed, and we'll pray tonight, and then we'll be dismissed. And once again, do continue to pray for the pastor. They come back, I think it's Tuesday, maybe, and so do pray for him and Miss Misty as they travel back, and pray for our services this weekend. I'm going to ask Brother Phil Kahn if he would close us in prayer tonight.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to learn from your word. We pray that you would help us to receive it and to dig for ourselves. Lord, we pray that you would be with those prayer requests made this evening. We pray that you be with each one. Lord, you know the need. You are the one that has the answer. Lord, for the young people, we pray that you continue to keep them safe